Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to Uncanny Catholic, where we explore everything in this world that is natural and supernatural from a Catholic perspective. I'm your host, Ursula Bielski, and I'm so glad that you are here today because I'm not crying. I have very watery eyes, watery eye, actually. I've had this for years, and I've done all the things the doctor has told me to do, but it still happens. So I'll be weeping through this whole odyssey that we're on together today. So don't mind me. I'm fine. I'm fine. As I was saying, I'm Ursula Bielski. I'm so glad you're here today because we are talking today about one of the most mysterious places on Earth and one of the most chilling places on Earth, if you believe the many stories that are told about it. It's the story of a remote castle in the Ardennes Forest in Belgium, and it is known properly by its proper name, which is the Chateau des Amerois. I had to spend several days learning how to say that. But it's more popularly known as the Mothers of Darkness Castle. Pretty interesting, right? And for those familiar with current conspiracy theories, this is said to be a key center of the Illuminati's power. This is a place where they meet. This is a place where they conduct rituals. This is a place where they plan world events together. It is also allegedly one of the main places where these hunting parties have been held. These are these parties of elites that meet to hunt trafficked children on the grounds of the estate, and in imitation or maybe influencing that famous story, The Most Dangerous Game. Remember that one from great books in grade school? We all had to read that. But this is supposed to be one of the main places where children have been victimized by these people who have literally hunted them down to kill them, to use them in rituals, etc. So we're going to take all this with a grain of salt because there's not a lot of information about this. But as you're going to hear in a few minutes, there actually has been a lot of evidence brought forth, be it circumstantial evidence, maybe hearsay evidence, to suggest that these stories are true. But of course, the powers that be, including the internet, don't seem to want us to talk about them. And I'll give you a specific example or examples of how I know that again in just a few minutes. So let's set the stage for this first of all. The Chateau d'Amerois is in the Ardennes Forest. This is this very famous forested region in Europe. It's densely wooded. It's in southern Belgium, but extends into Luxembourg and also northern France. It's not just a geographical area, but it's a place that's so rich in history, has been so important in warfare and military operations, and it's also been a key place where we've really seen like kind of the history of spirituality in humanity play out. You know, from ancient times through the birth of Christianity to current times, kind of doing like full circle. So these ancient times, the forest was considered a very sacred place for the Celts who lived in the area, and they literally worshipped the trees in this very dense forest, and also the hidden springs that you'll find all through there. These were considered, not just beautiful natural elements and creations of God, but they were considered to be conduits to the divine. And it was considered also to be, the whole forest was considered to be a liminal space where kind of the division between the physical world and the spiritual world they were broken. That line was broken, that line was blurred. And so basically, anything could happen when you were in the Ardennes Forest, and you might encounter any number of spiritual beings, including gods that were said to roam through the forest. Primarily, the goddess named Ardennes was said to, this was like her realm, and she ruled this realm, and she would be seen riding through the forest on a wild boar. The forest was a place that was full of all the things: witches, werewolves, vampires, all of these elements that we think of when we think of, medieval, gothic, spooky, spiritual, terrifying things, that you might encounter in the woods, right? You had them there in the Ardennes, and people really avoided it when they avoided it at night. And when Christianity began to develop, it became a place where Christians would start to go, especially Christian hermits would go into the forest. There would be, and live there. There would be mystics that would go into the forest to get their visions. And so we saw a transition there from this pagan world to the Christian world, but there were still pagans that were living in the area and worshiping in the area. So we see a real intersection between these two cultures for a long time in the Ardennes Forest. This region has also been, as I mentioned, very marked by conflict, and it's been a center of military operations going back to Roman times. In fact, the Romans did not like going into the Ardennes because they said it was not only a place where their opponents had so much cover where they could hide with all of the trees and everything, but it was also a place, they said, that was full of omens, apparitions, and they didn't like to go in there because they felt that they might come out cursed, or bringing something out with them, or maybe not even come out at all, for having fallen prey to some spiritual adversary, rather than a flesh and blood enemy. Despite all of these ancient, the ancient times and the ancient wars that were fought here and military operations that were fought in the Ardennes, the forest really saw most of its suffering during the two world wars in the 20th century. It was the site of the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, which played out just miles from the Chateau des Amerois, and led, as you may know, to some 19,000 deaths and many other injuries, sickness, disease. So if you, like me, having been a paranormal investigator and a demonologist for so many years, if you believe that the events that play out in history affect physical places, then you would definitely say that there's something bad about the Ardennes Forest today, with all of the ancient pagan worship that has gone on here, with all of the occult practice that has reportedly gone on here, with witchcraft and all that sort of thing. And also with all of the death and destruction and suffering that occurred during the world wars. I would say that has definitely left a blight and a permanent effect on the Ardennes Forest and the land surrounding the Chateau des Amerois. Now, adding to the castle is its inaccessibility, adding to the mystique of the whole place. There have been, in recent years, since it's become known, around the internet, many adventurers, podcasters and conspiracy theorists that have attempted to visit the castle, which is reported to be not occupied, not lived in right now, but it's still owned. It's not abandoned. And it's very fortified. People who try to visit are quickly turned away by private security. There are tripwires, hidden cameras. There are alarms, guard dogs It sounds terrifying. A garden dog in the a guard dog in the Ardennes Forest around this creepy castle sounds like a very deadly thing I would not want to encounter. But there are very sophisticated surveillance systems in place here, which has added to the mystique and the conspiracy around it. Visitors too, they don't really talk about these physical barriers to getting near the castle, but they talk about when they get closer to it, they feel like they're being watched. And that might be that because there are cameras probably hidden far out in the forest, but might be something else too. But they also talk about that they will hear whispering, they'll hear chanting and singing in the woods, and just a sense of menace or malevolence. And I think anyone that's been to like maybe Bachelor's Grove here in the Chicago area, or another, forest that's known to be haunted, I think you know that feeling precisely, that kind of feeling that's kind of like get out. Now, there's been a lot of, there's been a long line of ownership that we'll talk about in just a minute. But I think it's really important to point out, too, that it's not just, kind of the feeling of get out about the castle, but there have been numerous news agencies, documentary filmmakers that have tried to get into the castle to film or to make documentaries for television or to film movies there. And they are told in no uncertain terms, absolutely not. And that includes the BBC. It includes National Geographic. I'm sure it's included our friend Zach over at Ghost Adventures and other ghost hunting shows. But everyone has been told no. And so we have no footage from inside the castle. There's like 3 existing photographs from inside the castle. And floor plans, we just don't know what's inside. And so again, this all has added to the mystery around the castle and what's actually going on there. We're going to come back to them in just a moment, but today the castle is owned by the Solvay family. This is a kind of a shady Belgian wealthy family who they're billionaires, and they've made, this is kind of a weird little piece of trivia, they've made their money from pharmaceuticals and other things that have conspiracies of their own surrounding them, things such as fluoride. So they made a lot of money selling fluoride. So when you hear the conspiracy theories, we've heard a lot about this now, right? With RFKJ being put in charge of the being put into Trump's cabinet to go after the health and pharmaceutical industries. And he's talking about removing the fluoride from the drinking water. And everybody's talking again about the conspiracy about why exactly do we have fluoride mandated to be in our drinking water. And many people have suggested that it's a money thing. And someone made a deal at some point, possibly this Solvay family made a deal with the governments in exchange for something else. We don't know what. They were going to put drinking water, buy fluoride and put fluoride in all the drinking water. So what kind of a deal might that be? I don't know, but I guess maybe we'll find out in this episode. Now, to understand, we're going to look at the spiritual undertones of the Chateau des Amerois. But first we have to look at the origins, because there have been a lot of owners of this place before the Solvay family came in. And I think it's really important to point out, and we'll talk about this more, that this home, I mean, it is a home. It's huge, enormous. You see the picture in the thumbnail. But it was built by Catholic builders. It was built by a Catholic family. It was built to be a Catholic home with a chapel in the heart of it, reportedly. It was obviously influenced by Gothic architecture, with the spires rising to the heavens, just like all of the beautiful cathedrals all over Europe. So it did have these beautiful Catholic origins. So let's keep that in mind. But let's look at the history of the state. It starts in 1849 when the Count of Mesnil acquired the land with the intention of building a manor house. And by 1859, and that was just 10 years later, this beautiful manor house that he had built, he abandoned and he sold it to Theodore van den Noot. He was the eighth Marquess of Asche before he sold it in 1869 to Prince Philippe, the Count of Flanders, and he was the brother of King Leopold II. The original manor house was completely destroyed in fire in 1873. But Prince Philippe really loved living out there. He loved the home, and he quickly commissioned an architect named Gustave Santenoy to design a new home there. And this was to be a very grand home, again, as you can see by the pictures. This chapel was to be a focal point of the redesign, and he hired a famous artist of the time, Yule Helbig, to create beautiful art for the chapel. There was also an amazing estate surrounding the house with redwood trees, greenhouses that were filled with thousands of plant and flower species. He even designed these massive stables that were filled with horses. The family loved equestrian sports, and his wife, Princess Marie, she was an artist as well, and she drew beautiful sketches and watercolors of the estates that were apparently displayed all over the house. It sounds like just a really lovely place, when this family first lived there. Now, after Prince Philippe's death in 1905, his children sold the chateau to Robert Colette, and he was a timber merchant from Liège. And he lived there a very short time too. But unfortunately, what he did most of the time he was there was to pull a Mr. T on the place. Remember when this happened? When Mr. T bought the house in Lake Forest outside Chicago and chopped all the trees down. This is what Colette did. He chopped down most of the trees on the property before selling it to Alice Solvay. And the estate has remained in the Solvay family ever since. Now, the chateau's history also, like I said, it intersects with these other European events, especially the World Wars. In fact, during World War I, the chateau itself was occupied by a German patrol under Lieutenant Wolf-Werner von Blumenthal. He was of the 2nd Reserve Heavy Cavalry. It's funny, when I looked at this up, it said the state emerged largely unscathed from the occupation, though its wine cellar was not as fortunate. So apparently the Germans got into the wine cellar, but it is what it is. So again, the family's Catholic legacy, that original family, was really significant, and they really did build the current Chateau des Amerois to be a Catholic retreat. And it was definitely something that influenced their faith, definitely influenced everything they did, including the houses that they built. And that was common back then. That was very common back then. And I think that we just really need to keep that in mind. Now, one key feature of this chapel, this famous chapel that supposedly was designed for the chateau, has really influenced the conspiratorial aura of the chateau. And that is the so-called, the alleged Black Madonna that resides in this interior chapel of the chateau. As you may know, if you're a Catholic, Black Madonnas are rare, but they are seen throughout the history of Catholicism and in different parts of the world. And there's a lot of different theories about the origin of these Black Madonnas. Black Madonna just means it's a Madonna with a black face. So it's a Madonna that does not look like, the European Madonnas, or even, a Middle Eastern Madonna. It looks like a Black African Madonna. And so there are a lot of different ideas that historians suggest as to why we have these Black Madonnas throughout, early Catholicism, before Catholicism was a thing in countries with actual Black people in them. So, today we have all, Madonnas of every color and every race, beautiful paintings we see. If you go on Etsy, you can see like all the amazing, different Madonnas that people are painting. But some historians believe that these Black Madonnas were actually part of ancient pagan culture. I talk a lot about this in my latest book, The Devil in Dreamland, about, how, of course, so many people say that Catholicism and Christianity has, taken all of these things from the ancient pagan world and turned them into Christian things. I talk a lot. That's not true, but I talk a lot about that in my book, and we'll talk about that on an episode, maybe in a few months, actually, on this channel. That would be a good topic. But that's one theory, that these are motifs and images and icons from ancient pagan times that were assimilated by the church. Others say it's just a very practical thing. These Madonnas, the pictures, the statues have become blackened by the many hundreds of years of worship and candle soot from candles being lit in chapels and churches. Just this week, we saw the unveiling of the new Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And I, for one, am horrified by the fact that they cleaned all of the centuries of candle soot from the walls inside, which made it so dark. That's from all of the worship that was done, all of the masses that were done over all of those years. And it just breaks my heart that they just wiped it all away and we're supposed to be happy now because it's bright inside. And I'm not. Anyway, I digress. Anyway, the other thing, and then some historians think that these Madonnas were painted or sculpted specifically to show that the Blessed Mother is universal and that she represents all races around the world. So we don't exactly know the truth about what's behind the Black Madonnas, but she's not specific to the Chateau des Amerois. She is found in other places around the world. However, there are accounts from some claimed survivors of human trafficking and satanic ritual who have said that they have been in the chapel of the Black Madonna at the Chateau des Amerois, and that they were part of rituals that placed this Madonna at the center, and these were not Christian rituals. These were blood sacrifices. They were occult rituals that obviously characterized this Madonna as a pagan goddess and not as the Christian Blessed Mother. Some say that at these rituals there were hooded figures. Some specifically talked about women in hooded cloaks, which is where we start to get this idea of the Mothers of Darkness, as it's called, the Mothers of Darkness Castle. The Mothers of Darkness are, according to theories about the castle, a group of witches, a coven of witches that worship and perform rituals at the castle. And these rituals are done to not only receive direction, visions and messages for direction of the world, dark direction of the world, but also to receive power to enact these changes in you know, the things in world events that they're orchestrating. This is where this all comes from. And the Black Madonna in this chapel is a central part of this legend. And so they say that the Black Madonna has been hijacked, you know, like many other things in the castle, and many other things in Christianity, to be used in pagan, occult, and a very dark Luciferian rituals at the castle. One of the most unexpected aspects of the Mothers of Darkness Castle is its alleged connection to the Thousand Points of Light conspiracy, which is, of course, tied to a phrase coined by former U.S. President George H.W. Bush, which some believe refers to the Illuminati or to Luciferian symbolism. In this context, light is viewed not as the light of Christ, as, you know, Bush said that he was picturing everybody, you know, in the United States working, you know, their own little light of charity and goodwill and you know, the good of brotherly love, working together, you know, for the future. And so it was very, you know, it was painted as a very, you know, Christian thing, even though he didn't overtly, you know, refer to Christ. But any Christian American would think like, oh, he's talking about the Christian idea of the, you know, the Jesus is the light of the world and we all are lights and we don't keep our light under a bushel and, you know, all of that. So go out and be light to the world, right? But there are apparently a lot of other people that said that's not what he was referring to, that he was referring to a very different 1,000 points of light. And that, in fact, he was referring to 1,000 points of light, which are these covert occult practitioners that are all over the world implementing the dastardly plans prescribed by the Mothers of Darkness at the Chateau des Amerois. And there have actually been some survivors of abuse that lived through abuse at the castle or lived through the hunting games at the castle who claimed that they actually saw 1,000 literal points of light in one of the halls at the castle. So that in one of the ritual rooms, there are 1,000 candles or 1,000 electric lights. And this is like a literal symbol of the 1,000 points of light, you know, scattered around the world doing the evil work dictated by the Mothers of Darkness as they've received it from their pagan goddess, you know, living in the statue of our dear blessed mother. So it's some weird stuff going on. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. Is there any truth to any of this? Like, how can we believe any of this is true? Well, the reason we can believe any of this is true is that there is a very strong connection between the Chateau des Amerois and these conspiracies that we learn from victims of a Belgian child trafficker, abuser, and murderer by the name of Marc Dutroux. And Marc Dutroux, if you're into true crime, you know exactly who he is. He was one of the most heinous criminals in European history. And he was very deeply linked to the occult. And theorists believe that a lot of the activities that he carried out and that he talked about and that he said he saw other people carrying out happened at the Chateau des Amerois. When Dutroux was arrested, he more than hinted at a much larger network of occultists and specifically Luciferians who were doing the same kind of things that he was doing. And he said that many of them were elites, many of them were in government, law enforcement. And this was when things first started to come out and people started to talk about this. This was on the heels of the so-called Satanic Panic, which I also write a lot about in my recent book, The Devil in Dreamland. I'll put that book down below if you'd like to read it. The Satanic Panic, it's called the Satanic Panic as if it didn't happen. Everybody talks about it as if it was not true and it didn't happen. And in my book, I talk about how that is just not true at all. There are many, many instances of satanic ritual abuse going on in the 80s and into the 90s, and there still are today. And yet even today, people refer to the Satanic Panic and deny that it happened and deny that it's happening today. But the arrest of Dutroux was really when we start to have in Western culture, people start to talk about and wonder about satanic ritual abuse on this wide scale, the elites, the Illuminati, law enforcement being involved in trafficking and all of this. So this is really a very cultural story about the Chateau because it really has a lot to do with the development of those themes in our culture in recent years. When I was reading this, I was talking with ChatGPT, asking some questions that I couldn't seem to find answers to online. So I thought maybe ChatGPT, combing the internet, could find them for me. It's very interesting because ChatGPT told me there is no evidence supporting the idea of a larger occult network involved in the abuse of children. And even though there were many articles that I found that talked about members of a specific cult, the cult of Abraxas, that were involved with the same circles as Mark Dutroux, even some police officers and other law enforcement officials. So there are many reporters that reported on actual members of law enforcement and government officials that were Satanists, essentially. And ChatGPT told me that's not true. And then it also immediately deleted my question. Okay? Just keep that in mind. Well, Mark Dutroux, let's look at him for a second because he had a troubled childhood, as you can imagine, and there were reports of neglect and abuse by his family and maybe even incest. He would later admit to stealing from his father's massive collection of pornography and selling it to classmates at school. His father would sit upstairs and just read porn, watch porn constantly. And we know from Exorcist that this is a huge conduit for demonic activity. And this is one of the main reasons for demonic possession in our day and age. So it would not be at all surprising if the Dutroux household had some invisible family members because of that behavior of Dutroux's father. By the time he was very young, he was still very young, and he was doing petty crime. By the 1980s, he was a convicted sex offender. And in 1989, he was convicted of abducting and raping young girls, for which he was sentenced to only 13 years in prison. But then he was released in 1992 after serving just 3 years of his sentence. And again, our mind go back to why was he in prison for such a short time? And while he was in prison, we're told he was given a lot of money from the government, like a lot of money, like where he could buy these very expensive houses and things. It was very strange, or maybe not. Well, in the mid-1990s, Dutroux began his most notorious series of crimes. Between 1995 and 1996, let me just mention that this short prison sentence is a big part of what people talk about when they talk about Dutroux. They say that he went on to do all of these other crimes because he was not kept in prison. He was not prosecuted properly. And so it was a systemic failure of the justice system that led to him doing the horrific things that he would go on to do. So I'm just pointing that out because people do not point to the Satanism, the occultism at all. They say like, oh, well, this was a failure of law enforcement. They're just lazy. It had nothing to do with the fact that, the actual cops were Satan worshipers. But anyway, we'll come back to that. Between 1995 and 1996, Dutroux kidnapped and imprisoned several young girls, often keeping them in underground cells beneath his house. Some of the victims were kept alive for months and subjected to horrific abuse. He murdered at least 2 of the girls, while the others were eventually able to escape or to be rescued. He was also implicated in this much wider pedophile network, and many believe he was involved with these powerful individuals or elites, like I said, who shielded him from being arrested or prosecuted earlier. Dutroux's arrest in 1996 brought the full scope of his crimes to light at last. He had buried the bodies of several victims in his yard, and evidence showed his involvement with an accomplice, his actual wife, Michelle Martin. Sounds like a more sinister version of the Jeffrey Epstein thing and Ghislaine Maxwell. Doesn't it? Yeah, it seems very similar. But his wife actually helped him to imprison and abuse the girls. In 2004, Dutroux was convicted for the abduction, rape, and murder of several girls and was sentenced to life in prison. The case did lead to reforms in Belgium's justice system and a major shift in public attitudes toward criminal investigation, especially of child crimes. There were huge protests in the streets of Belgium when Dutroux was arrested, with thousands, tens of thousands of people turning out in anger against the government and the law enforcement community for shielding him from justice. Several of these victims have gone on to publicly talk about things that happened at Dutroux's hands, at the hands of these other of the elites that he ran around with, and elites that were allegedly involved in these occult rituals. And some of these, they've been on podcasts and television shows and things like that. And some of these have been tied to the Chateau des Amerois, and have specifically talked about being in that location, as well as other castles and chateaus around Europe where these things were going on. So this is, again, where we get some of the information and hearsay evidence that comes from, that points to the chateau as a place of elite occult ritual and power and satanic ritual abuse, etc. Now, I talked about finding a lot of articles about Dutroux, and I want to read you this one. And the headline is Police Raid Center of Satanic Sect. And this, unfortunately, was published on Christmas Eve in, I believe it was 1996. Articles written by Jeremy Lavelle. Police investigating a Belgian gang accused of child sexual abuse and murder raided the headquarters of a satanic sect at the weekend looking for clues. It said 150 police and special investigators raided the headquarters of the Institute Abraxas in Forches-la-Marche near the central Belgian city of Charleroi on Saturday night. The television showed police taking away bags of papers, video cassettes, and a refrigerator. It said they also took away black magic ritual implements and human skulls. The RTBF television reported that the raid had been prompted by the discovery of an undated letter addressed to someone named Bernard, asking him to remind someone else that a special ceremony was approaching approaching and to remember a, quote, special gift. The letter was signed by, quote, Anubis, an ancient Egyptian god and the assumed name of the high priest of the Abraxas sect. A Frenchman by the name of Bernard Weinstein was an accomplice of a gang led by a convicted rapist, Marc Dutroux, who has admitted to killing him. Weinstein's body was found alongside those of 8-year-olds Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo in mid-August, buried on a property belonging to Dutroux in the town of Sars-la-Bussière, southwest of Charleroi. The 2 girls, abducted in June of 1995, had starved to death earlier this year. Dominique Kindermans, the high priestess of the sect, said that to her knowledge, neither Dutroux nor Weinstein had ever been members of or connected with Abraxas. Yeah, right. A spokesman for gendarmes searching an abandoned mine complex in nearby Jumet, a suburb of Charleroi, refused to comment on many links between the Abraxas raid and their own hunt for a secret hiding place they are convinced Dutroux had for abducted children, which they had not yet found at the time of this article. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that, as mentioned, the generally held theory is that these things went on for so long because of the failure of law enforcement to investigate in a timely manner because they were, lazy, or because they didn't believe it was going on. But the truth is that these other sources have flatly said that members of the police and other agencies were also members of the Abraxas cult in Belgium. When I asked ChatGPT about these articles, and I said, well, these journalists discovered that there actually was a connection between law enforcement and this cult. ChatGPT told me that it was outright said that it wasn't true. And then ChatGPT deleted that question too. I have never had a question deleted by ChatGPT, ever. Never. But ChatGPT deleted my 2 questions about Marc Dutroux and the cult of Abraxas. I think we really need to step back from the theories about the, all the conspiracies surrounding the Chateau des Amerois and all these terrible things that occur there, because we could sit here all day and then tomorrow and the next day and the next week and the next month and the next year trying to figure out the evidence for any of this happening. But we already know the answer. We know this is happening because we are told that explicitly in Ephesians 6:12, for we contend not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness. And we well know that there are world rulers of this present darkness and we do know that these things are going on. Have they gone on, and are they going on at the Chateau des Amerois in the Ardennes Forest? That we may never know, or perhaps we will. Perhaps a new era of justice is coming, when God's justice will rain down and shine his light into these dark corners of these remote places that have had so many rumors swirling around them for so long. So we wait and hope for that day. And I'm so glad that you're here with me today. If you want to have a dramatic scripted reading of this story, I do those on the Ghost Lorist podcast, and you can find those episodes right here on the channel. Each month I have a episode of Uncanny Catholic that's devoted to a particular location or story, like this one that we looked at today about the Chateau des Amerois. And then I do a dramatic reading that's more of like a storytelling scripted thing that you can listen to while you're falling asleep, although you may not fall asleep after you listen to some of them because some of them are pretty freaky. So it depends on what you like, or if you like a little bit of both. And we just have a lot going on this channel, and I'm really glad that you're here. I really want to encourage you to check out my website, worldofthesupernatural.com, because I'm up to a lot of things all the time. I want to pray the St. Michael prayer together. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I will see you right here on Uncanny Catholic next time. And until then, I'll see you around the world of the supernatural. Until then, remember to pray for ghosts. See you next time. I'm Ursula Bielski.